Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about essay structure and how to organize your paper. So I'm specifically looking at research papers and how they differ from maybe the conventional 5-paragraph essay structure that you're used to. So we're going to talk a little bit about different kinds of papers and what they might look like in terms of their organization or structure. So let's first review what a 5-paragraph essay structure would look like. So a 5-paragraph essay is kind of the typical or standard paper organization that students are taught in high school or even elementary school when they're learning how to write a paper. And it contains 5 paragraphs. So you have your introduction. You usually have 3 body paragraphs and a conclusion. So that's 5 paragraphs in total. It's sometimes called a keyhole essay just because we're also taught how to sort of structure our paragraphs to open broadly and then to get narrow in on our thesis statement, which is usually the last sentence of your intro. And then you get wider again in the middle paragraphs where you add your evidence. And then you broaden out again when your conclusion when you restate your thesis, but broaden it out to address the larger issues, I guess, of your topic more in a global or world context. So it could shape like a keyhole. But yeah, this structure, I mean, there's nothing wrong with this. This is really, I think, an essential part of learning how to write an essay. But again, you don't have to follow this pattern every time you write a paper. You can deviate from it. And in some cases, like in your research paper, I'm asking you to sort of look at the structure of your essay in a new way. So let's take a look at another type of structure or organization, the scientific paper. And those of you, who are in the sciences, you'll start reading articles or essays that have been published, and you'll notice that they have different sections or headings used within them. So they have different sections than other kinds of papers. I don't read a lot of scientific papers just because I'm, in the arts and humanities college, and I read, mostly literature studies, which is another whole type of essay. But scientific papers, are usually written in APA style, and they have, specific headings or sections that they use to structure the information. So usually there's a title page, they have an abstract, which is just basically summarizing what that article is about or what that essay is about. They include an introduction. Often their scientific methods or materials are described. So if they're doing an experiment, they'll describe, what it is that they did, how many people they looked at, or what their study was of, and the materials that they used. They'll have a results section where they'll discuss the data. They might include graphs and information like that to organize their results. And then there's usually a discussion section where they talk about the importance of their research findings. So this is kind of their reflection on the whole scientific experiment as a whole and what they've learned from it. And then in their conclusion, they can provide any final thoughts, summarize their work as a whole, and address maybe any possible gaps or further questions related to their research. So that's kind of a new way of looking at essay organization. And it's familiar for those in the sciences. They'll learn how to organize their papers in this new way. For our assignment number 2, I'm asking you to write a research paper and think about the organization of your paper in a slightly different way than what you're used to. So I want you to start thinking about sections rather than specific numbers of paragraphs. So I want you to kind of move away from the 5-paragraph structure, but just a little bit, because you can still sort of use that kind of as a basis of your thinking. I do think it's, useful to have body paragraphs in mind. But I want you to sort of think about sections of your paper, and I've given you an outline in the syllabus and on the course homepage. So I'm looking for there to be an introduction paragraph in your essay, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a separate video, but that would include your thesis statement. And then in the main part of your essay, this is where your research findings are going to be conveyed or summarized. This is where I want your evidence to be included. So you could have body section 1, 2, and 3, or 1 and 2, depending on how you organize your information, your research. So in this case, I've suggested maybe you could discuss the problem or topic that you're setting up in your paper. Section number 2 could identify specific points, could be causes or effects related to that problem. And then section 3 could identify possible solutions to the problem. And I don't want to limit you to just one paragraph for each of these sections. I want to be more flexible in this outline, so you can have maybe 2 paragraphs if you needed them. So I don't want you to sort of count 1, 2, 3 paragraphs, I'm done. I want you to think about what actually needs to be included in these different sections. And then I'm also asking you to include a discussion section. So you're probably not familiar with writing a discussion section in previous papers, but this is where you sort of do a little bit of self-reflection. You can use first person and write about how this topic is important to you, or what you've learned in the process of studying or researching this topic. And then finally add a conclusion paragraph. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit more about the body of your essay. And if we go back to our little keyhole here, this is the middle section of your paper. So you have your intro, you have your conclusion at the end, but it's the body, this middle section where you include all of your research findings. This is the evidence that you found. This is quotations, this is paraphrasing, data, facts and figures, all that kind of information that you've gathered. So that's the body of your essay. So if we go back here, so this is an example of how you might organize the body section of your research paper. So I'm just going to pretend this is my thesis. University students face stress, which has been associated with a high level of depression and anxiety. To combat stress-related depression and anxiety in students, research shows that increased physical activity, balanced nutrition, psychological therapies, and medications all have a positive effect. Okay, so that's my thesis, and that's the sort of guiding outline that I'm using to organize the rest of my paper. So in my body of my paper, I'm going to discuss what I see to be the main issue or main topic, which is that university students are facing high rates of depression and anxiety. So I'm going to include one part of my paper to devote to just fleshing out this problem that I see or I recognize. And I might include facts and figures related to how university students are facing high rates of depression and anxiety. So I'll back that information up. So this might be 1 to 2 paragraphs within this section. I'm not sure, it depends on, what I want to include. It might just be 1 paragraph, really. I can probably sum it up in 1 paragraph, just stating what the problem is, and add some facts and figures here. But section 2 is where I want to actually discuss the possible treatments that I've come across in my research findings. So to combat stress-related depression and anxiety, research shows that these 4 things are all beneficial. So that's where I want to sort of maybe divide my research findings up into more separate paragraphs. So in this case, I'm going to discuss 4 different treatments. So this one might be 4 paragraphs in length. So I might want to devote, 1 paragraph to discussing physical activity and how that has a positive impact on lowering rates of depression and anxiety. I might want to devote another paragraph to nutrition for the same reason, find findings or information that relates to that. I might look at various therapy options and group those together into 1 paragraph. Or, that could be even more paragraphs if I decided to talk about a few more specifically or focus on a couple. And then medications, I might have that in 1 paragraph on its own. So yeah, this is sort of how I would organize my paper if this was my thesis statement. So I'm really using my thesis statement as a kind of jumping off point to decide how I'm going to organize the rest of my paper. And in this case, I'm kind of have problem and solution as the main organization for the rest of the body. So I'm discussing the problem first, and then I'm going to discuss 4 possible solutions to this main issue that I'm discussing. So yeah, that's basically it. So you don't necessarily have to have 3 body sections in your essay. You can have 2. It's just, again, up to you how you want to sort of separate and divide and cohesively organize the main ideas of your research. And use your thesis statement as a kind of outline to help you keep organized and think about the relationship of your research findings. Is it a problem solution, or is it cause and effect, or is it pros and cons? So think about how you want to organize your essay in relation to your thesis and what it is you're focused on. And then, so these are my 2 main body sections. And then after the body of your paper, I'm also asking you to include a discussion section. And again, this might not be typical of your average research paper, but a lot of scientific papers now ask you for a kind of discussion section. And this is where you kind of do a little bit more analysis of the research. So you delve into the importance or meaning of these research findings. So why is it important that there is a high incidence of depression and anxiety in students? Or why is it important that there are treatment options out there? So how does this topic, why is it an important thing that we need to learn more about? So you're really getting into the sort of the heart of the issue, whatever issue it is that you're addressing, and why it's important to you, or why is it important culturally or amongst your peer group, and why are you shedding light on this issue by writing about it? So that's kind of where you need to address those issues. You can also do a bit of self-reflection and reflect on how maybe your thought process has changed before you started this paper. You maybe had certain ideas about what being a student is about, or what you might face as a student in relation to depression and anxiety or that kind of thing. But maybe you've learned something in the process, so you maybe could reflect on that. You could discuss how maybe your behavior might change as a result of the research. So, as a student, you might say, well, this process of reading about this topic has made me change in certain ways, and reflect on what I can do in my day-to-day schedule to include, healthy nutrition and exercise as part of my routine, blah, 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 right? So you kind of can reflect on what the specific research findings and how you're going to incorporate that into your own life. And it's basically you could just sort of broaden the discussion and discuss how maybe it's an important issue, not just for you, but for others. You could talk about how this topic impacts you or your classmates, your community, your family, or other larger demographic groups. And then finally, your conclusion. This is sort of more of a formal ending for your paper. It's usually where you will restate your thesis in a new way. So I don't want word for word repetition of your thesis statement. I want a kind of restated thesis in a new way. So you're kind of conveying the same meaning, but not word for word. So you want to go back to your thesis statement in this case. University students face stress, blah, 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 blah. And this is the ways that we can combat it. So you could, restate that kind of statement in your conclusion. You also want to briefly sum up the main points that you've made in your paper. So in this case, I want to highlight those 4 key findings of, physical activity, nutrition, therapy options, medication as possible treatments. You want to discuss any wider repercussions of this topic. So why is it important that we address the stress facing university students at this moment in time? So you could situate it, you could say, in this climate right now with COVID-19, etc., there are even, other reasons why this issue might be more pressing. You could address any gaps or further questions, and just address why it's important or relevant at this time to address this specific research topic that you've addressed. So you could, again, situate it within the time and place where you're living, and discuss why it's important that that you're shedding light on this specific topic. And of course, at the very end of any paper, you're going to include a reference page or works cited. If you are using MLA, it'll be titled a works cited page. It should be works cited. If it's an APA, you'll have a reference section. And this will be a list of any of the research sources that you've used throughout the body of your paper. And that's basically what you need to include for your research paper. So it might be a little different from what you're used to and deviates in terms of the number of paragraphs, but you can still sort of use the kind of keyhole structure to sort of guide your thought process in terms of structuring overall your essay. So you're still going to have an introduction, you still have a body of your essay, and you still have a conclusion, but it's just this body section is going to be a little bit different in terms of how you've organized it. So instead of counting 3 paragraphs, think about it more in terms of larger sections that relate to either the problem and solutions, or the cause and effect, or the pros and the cons, and think about how you're organizing that information within this section.